The garden gnome stared back at James Carter, a silent witness to the most recent indignity thrust upon him by the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. Its chipped paint and weathered ceramic body told a story far beyond its 3-inch transgression from the meticulously defined landscaping boundaries. This wasn't just a decorative lawn ornament. It was a connection to his past, a memory of his grandmother Elena, after whom his wife was named. James traced the gnome's faded cheek, remembering the day his grandmother had given it to him. "Some rules are meant to be bent, some to be broken," she'd whispered, her eyes twinkling with a rebellious spirit that seemed to skip generations. He'd been 22 then, full of idealism and hope, believing that rules existed to protect people, not to suffocate them. Oakwood Estates had seemed like a dream when he and Elena first toured the neighborhood 5 years ago. Pristine houses lined immaculate streets, each property a carbon copy of perfection. The HOA representative had been nothing short of a used car salesman, selling not just a home, but a lifestyle of conformity and order. "We maintain property values," she'd said, her smile as artificial as the neighborhood's carefully curated appearance. At first, the rules seemed reasonable. Keep your lawn mowed. Don't paint your house an outrageous color. Maintain basic property standards. But over time, the regulations had become increasingly suffocating. The HOA wasn't just maintaining standards. They were crushing individual expression, turning homeowners into prisoners of their own properties. James remembered the first warning, a yellow notice for his mailbox being 2 degrees off the prescribed angle. Then came the complaint about his son's basketball hoop, too visible from the street. The flower beds were next. One type of marigold was apparently not approved for the neighborhood aesthetic. Each letter felt like a personal attack, a systematic dismantling of his family's right to enjoy their own home. Elena had always been the peacekeeper. As a corporate lawyer, she understood the power of picking battles. "Save your energy for what truly matters," she'd say, writing checks to appease the HOA's endless demands. But something had changed in her too. The latest fine, $500 for the garden gnome, had pushed her past her breaking point. "This is ridiculous," she'd muttered that morning, her professional composure cracking. "They're treating us like children, not homeowners who've invested our life savings in this place." The gnome seemed to smile knowingly. It had survived decades, through his grandmother's garden, through moves across 3 states, and now here in this suffocating suburban paradise. If a simple ceramic figure could survive, so could they. James opened his laptop, fingers hovering over the keyboard. Years of frustration bubbled to the surface. This wasn't just about a garden gnome anymore. This was about dignity, about freedom, about the right to exist in one's own space without constant microscopic scrutiny. He began to type, each keystroke a declaration of war against the HOA's tyranny. By the time he was finished, Margaret Holloway and her board of micromanagers would understand that Oakwood Estates was about to witness a rebellion unlike anything they'd ever seen. The garden gnome watched, a silent sentinel of resistance. The Oakwood Estates Community Center had never witnessed such tension. Folding chairs creaked under the weight of frustrated homeowners, their collective anger creating an electric atmosphere that made the fluorescent lights seem to flicker with anticipation. James Carter stood at the front of the room, transformed from the mild-mannered homeowner everyone once knew into a revolutionary leader. Behind him, a massive presentation board displayed a mosaic of HOA violation notices, financial records, and carefully documented grievances. Sticky notes in various colors mapped out a complex web of what could only be described as systematic harassment. Each note represented a homeowner's individual struggle, a testament to the HOA's suffocating control. Margaret Holloway sat in the back row, her perfectly pressed gray blazer and immaculate silver bob a stark contrast to the rising tide of rebellion. She'd ruled Oakwood Estates with an iron fist for 15 years, and she wasn't about to let a few disgruntled homeowners challenge her authority. Her fingers, adorned with a massive diamond ring, likely purchased through questionable HOA fund allocations, drummed a nervous rhythm on her leather portfolio. Sarah Thompson, a retired high school English teacher, was the first to break the initial silence. "Tell them about the rose bushes," she called out, her voice crackling with years of suppressed frustration. James nodded, clicking to a slide that showed her meticulously maintained garden. Mrs. Thompson was fined $250 for her rose bushes being 2 inches taller than the HOA-approved height, he announced, his voice calm but cutting. Robert Gonzalez, a recently retired mechanical engineer, stood up next. They threatened to place a lion on my house because my trash can was 6 inches outside the designated pickup area, he declared, pulling out a file of correspondence that showed an escalating series of warnings and threats. Alina Carter, sitting beside her husband, recognized the legal battlefield forming. Her corporate law background gave her a keen understanding of power structures. This was more than a simple homeowners dispute. This was a referendum on community governance, on the very concept of individual rights versus collective control. As James continued his presentation, he methodically dismantled the HOA's facade of legitimacy. Spreadsheets revealed questionable financial transactions. Email chains exposed selective enforcement based on personal vendettas. Bank statements showed suspicious transfers and unexplained expenses. For years, we've been treated like children, James declared, his voice rising. Micromanaged down to the color of our welcome mats, the precise angle of our mailboxes, the exact height of our grass. We've paid thousands in fines, lived in fear of these monthly inspections, allowed our most personal spaces to be policed by a small group of power-hungry individuals. Murmurs of agreement grew into a chorus of support. Homeowners who had previously been too afraid to speak out now found their voices. Margaret Holloway's perfectly maintained composure began to crack. Her usual tactics of intimidation and division were falling apart. Dr. Emily Chen, a local pediatrician, stood up. I've documented how these constant fines and stress are affecting our community's mental health, she announced, holding up a thick medical report. This isn't just about property values. This is about human dignity. The room was transforming from a passive gathering to a strategic planning session. They would challenge the HOA's bylaws, demand a full financial audit, and if necessary, pursue legal action. The rebellion had begun, and there was no turning back. Margaret Holloway looked around the room, finally understanding that her reign of terror was coming to an end. The conference room of Bradshaw and Associates law firm buzzed with an intensity that matched the chaos brewing in Oakwood Estates. Alina Carter spread her meticulously organized documents across the mahogany table, each page a potential weapon in the impending legal battle against the HOA. Michael Bradshaw, a silver-haired litigation specialist with 40 years of experience, adjusted his reading glasses. This is more than just a simple homeowners dispute, he muttered, thumbing through the financial records James and Elena had compiled. Forensic evidence of potential embezzlement, selective enforcement, and systematic harassment jumped from the pages. They've been running this HOA like a personal piggy bank, Elena explained, her corporate lawyer's precision cutting through the complexity. A series of suspicious transactions told a story of misappropriated funds, lavish board member retreats, unnecessary legal consultations, and questionable property management contracts that seemed to benefit a select few. James had done more than just compile documents. He'd interviewed longtime residents, collected years of correspondence, and built a comprehensive case that exposed the HOA's systemic corruption. Elderly residents shared stories of intimidation, middle-aged homeowners revealed hidden fines, and young families described the psychological toll of constant scrutiny. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Marcus Rodriguez, a forensic accountant who lived 2 blocks away, had been quietly gathering financial data. His spreadsheets revealed a pattern of financial irregularities that went back nearly a decade. Funds earmarked for community maintenance had been diverted, board members had received questionable consulting fees, and entire budget lines seemed to exist solely to funnel money to Margaret Holloway and her inner circle. We're not just fighting for our right to have a garden gnome, James explained to Bradshaw. We're fighting against a system that has stripped homeowners of their basic rights, that has turned a community protection mechanism into a tool of oppression. Elena pulled out a series of emails that showed a pattern of selective enforcement. Homes owned by board members or their friends consistently escaped the microscopic scrutiny applied to other residents. A property owned by Margaret Holloway's nephew had multiple violations that would have resulted in thousands of dollars in fines for anyone else. Bradshaw leaned back, a hint of a smile crossing his weathered face. "This isn't just a lawsuit," he said. "This is a class action waiting to happen." The legal strategy began to take shape. They would challenge the HOA's bylaws, demand a complete financial audit, seek damages for years of illegal fines, and potentially pursue criminal charges for financial misconduct. Each document was a nail in the HOA's coffin, each piece of evidence a step towards justice. Outside the law firm's windows, the first signs of support were emerging. Homeowners from neighboring communities had begun to reach out. This was no longer just about Oakwood Estates. This was becoming a movement. Margaret Holloway, still believing in her invincibility, had no idea of the legal storm gathering against her. Her reign of terror was about to meet its match in the carefully prepared documents spread across Michael Bradshaw's conference table. The rebellion had found its legal teeth, and it was ready to bite. Margaret Holloway's fingers trembled as she read the legal notice. It wasn't just a lawsuit. It was a full-scale assault on everything she had built over 15 years of controlling Oakwood Estates. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling, and she knew exactly who was responsible: James and Alina Carter. In the past, Margaret had crushed dissent with calculated precision. Anonymous complaints, strategic fines, and subtle intimidation had always kept residents in line. But this time was different. The Carters had done the unthinkable. They'd united the neighborhood. She immediately called an emergency meeting of the HOA board, summoning her most loyal allies to the community center's back room. Richard Thompson, the board's treasurer, arrived looking nervous. He knew too much, and the mounting evidence threatened to expose years of financial manipulation. "We need to fight back," Margaret declared, her voice a calculated mix of anger and control. "We'll bury them in legal paperwork. We'll find something, anything, to discredit the Carters." Their first move was predictable. They began digging into James and Alina's personal and professional lives, hoping to find any vulnerability they could exploit. Bank records, social media, professional history. Nothing was off limits in their desperate search for ammunition. But the Carters were prepared. Alina's legal expertise and James's meticulous documentation had anticipated every possible counterattack. Each potential line of assault was already blocked, each potential weakness fortified. The local media caught wind of the brewing conflict. A young investigative reporter, Sarah Martinez, saw the story for what it was: a David versus Goliath battle that represented a broader struggle against bureaucratic overreach. Her initial article painted the HOA in a damning light, highlighting the systematic harassment and financial irregularities. Margaret's next move was more insidious. She began pressuring board members who might waver, reminding them of past favors, hinting at potential consequences of breaking ranks. Some board members started to receive anonymous threats, subtle messages suggesting professional and personal repercussions if they didn't maintain solidarity. But the neighborhood had changed. The fear that once ruled Oakwood Estates was transforming into collective resistance. Neighbors who had previously avoided conflict now shared information, supported each other, and stood united against the HOA's tactics. James discovered Margaret's latest strategy through an unexpected source: a whistleblower within the HOA's inner circle. Someone was finally willing to break ranks, to tell the truth about years of corruption and control. The battle lines were drawn. Margaret Holloway believed she could still win through intimidation and legal maneuvering. The Carters knew the truth was their most powerful weapon. As the community held its breath, everyone understood that this was about more than just one neighborhood. This was a fight for individual rights, for community dignity, for the simple right to feel safe and respected in one's own home. The counterattack had begun, and neither side was willing to back down. The county courthouse stood like a monument to justice, its imposing stone facade a stark contrast to the personal drama about to unfold inside. James and Alina Carter sat side by side, their hands intertwined, facing the preliminary hearing that would determine the fate of their lawsuit against the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. Michael Bradshaw adjusted his tie, a veteran of countless legal battles, but even he felt the weight of this moment. This was more than a simple property dispute. It was a referendum on community governance, on the very concept of individual rights versus collective control. Margaret Holloway arrived with her legal team, a carefully assembled group of corporate attorneys who had never lost a case. Her eyes were cold, calculating, a general preparing for what she believed would be a decisive battle. She had weathered challenges before, crushed dissent with surgical precision. This would be no different. The courtroom hummed with tension. Behind the Carters sat a phalanx of Oakwood Estates residents, some wearing matching green ribbons, a symbol of their solidarity. Sarah Thompson, the retired teacher who had been fined for her rose bushes, held a folder filled with documentation of her own struggles. Robert Gonzalez sat nearby, his mechanical engineer's precision evident in the meticulously organized evidence he brought. Judge Alina Rodriguez, no relation to the Carters, settled into her seat. She was known for her no-nonsense approach and keen understanding of community law. This case had caught the attention of legal experts across the state. What happened here could set a precedent for HOA regulations everywhere. Bradshaw's opening statement was a surgical strike. He methodically presented evidence of financial misconduct, selective enforcement, and systematic harassment. Spreadsheets showed years of suspicious transactions. Email chains revealed a pattern of intimidation. Bank statements exposed what could only be described as a personal slush fund masquerading as community management. Margaret's lead attorney. The news spread like wildfire through Oakwood Estates and beyond. Local media outlets picked up the story, transforming what had begun as a neighborhood dispute into a regional sensation. Investigative reporters descended on the community, each camera and microphone a potential weapon in exposing years of systematic abuse. Richard Thompson, the HOA's longtime treasurer, was the first to crack. Faced with mounting evidence and the potential of criminal charges, he made a decision that would change everything. Early one morning, he walked into the local district attorney's office with a briefcase full of documents, years of financial records that told a story of corruption far more extensive than anyone had imagined. Margaret Holloway's carefully constructed world began to disintegrate. Her closest allies abandoned her, one by one. Board members who had once been her most loyal supporters now scrambled to distance themselves, providing their own statements to investigators. The network of intimidation and control she built over 15 years collapsed like a house of cards. The community center, once a symbol of Margaret's power, became ground zero for the rebellion. Homeowners who had lived in fear for years now gathered openly, sharing stories of harassment, comparing notes on years of unjust fines and arbitrary enforcement. What had started as a local uprising was becoming a movement. Social media amplified the story. A Facebook group created by Sarah Thompson, the retired teacher who had been fined for her rose bushes, grew to over 5,000 members in just days. Similar groups began popping up in other communities, inspired by Oakwood Estates' stand against HOA tyranny. Alina Carter found herself at the center of a growing legal storm. Her expertise as a corporate lawyer made her a sought-after voice for homeowners' rights. Speaking engagements, media interviews, and consulting requests poured in. What had begun as a personal fight had become a broader crusade against bureaucratic overreach. The financial impact was immediate and devastating for the HOA. Insurance rates skyrocketed. Potential legal settlements loomed like dark clouds. Property values in Oakwood Estates became volatile, with potential buyers now asking pointed questions about the community's governance. James discovered an unexpected ally in Dr. Emily Chen, the local pediatrician who had documented the mental health impact of the HOA's practices. Her medical reports became crucial evidence, highlighting the psychological toll of constant harassment and control. As investigations deepened, more shocking revelations emerged. The HOA had been operating more like a personal fiefdom than a community management organization. Kickbacks, selective enforcement, and systematic intimidation were just the tip of the iceberg. Margaret Holloway, once the undisputed queen of Oakwood Estates, now found herself increasingly isolated. Former allies avoided her calls. Her reputation was in tatters, her power completely dismantled. The garden gnome that had started it all, the 3-inch violation that sparked the rebellion, now sat in James and Alina's living room. A reminder that sometimes the smallest act of defiance can topple the most entrenched systems of control. The fallout was just beginning, and Oakwood Estates would never be the same again. The community center looked different now. Gone were the sterile white walls and rigid chair arrangements that had once symbolized Margaret Holloway's oppressive regime. Instead, the space buzzed with energy, hope, and a sense of collaborative potential that few residents had ever experienced before. James and Alina Carter stood at the front of the room, but this was no longer about their personal battle. This was about reimagining what a homeowners association could be, a true community rather than a system of control. Dr. Emily Chen presented her research on the psychological impact of the previous HOA's management. Years of constant scrutiny, arbitrary fines, and fear had taken a measurable toll on residents' mental health. Now, they had an opportunity to create something fundamentally different. The new bylaws took shape through collective input. Every resident had a voice. Sarah Thompson, the retired teacher, led a committee on fair landscaping regulations. Robert Gonzalez, with his engineering precision, developed transparent financial oversight mechanisms. Marcus Rodriguez, the forensic accountant, designed a completely new financial management system with multiple layers of checks and balances. Alina's legal expertise proved crucial in crafting governance documents that protected individual rights while maintaining community standards. The new HOA would be a cooperative, not a dictatorship. Term limits were established. Transparent financial reporting became mandatory. Every decision would require community input. The most radical change was the voting system. No longer would a small, entrenched group control everything. Every homeowner would have a meaningful say, with digital platforms enabling real-time communication and decision-making. The days of secret meetings and arbitrary enforcement were over. Richard Thompson, seeking redemption for his previous complicity, volunteered to help rebuild the community's financial systems. His insider knowledge became a tool for transparency rather than manipulation. It was a second chance he was determined to use wisely. The legal settlements had been substantial. Instead of lining individual pockets, the funds were used to improve community infrastructure. A new community garden replaced the rigid, overregulated landscaping of the past. A mental health support group was established. Educational workshops on community governance became a monthly tradition. Margaret Holloway was long gone, her legal battles consuming what remained of her reputation. The community that once feared her now spoke of her as a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when power goes unchecked. The garden gnome that had started it all now sat in a display case in the community center, a symbol of resistance, of the power of standing up against injustice. Children would visit and hear the story of how a 3-inch violation became a catalyst for community transformation. As the sun set on Oakwood Estates, something fundamental had changed. This was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a community in the truest sense of the word, united, supportive, and committed to collective well-being. The rebellion had succeeded, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. 2 years had passed since the rebellion that transformed Oakwood Estates. The community had become something of a legend, a case study in grassroots change, featured in urban planning journals and community governance conferences across the country. James Carter stood on his front porch, watching his son play in the front yard. The garden gnome, now a neighborhood mascot, sat proudly near the flower beds, no longer a symbol of rebellion, but of hope. Where once there were rigid rules and constant fear, now there was freedom, creativity, and genuine community. The ripple effects extended far beyond Oakwood Estates. Neighboring communities began adopting similar governance models. State legislators started introducing bills that would provide more oversight and protection for homeowners against HOA overreach. What had begun as a local fight had become a movement. Alina had become a sought-after consultant, helping other communities restructure their homeowners associations. Her work took her across the country, but Oakwood Estates remained her most profound achievement. She'd proven that systemic change was possible, that people could reclaim their dignity and sense of community. The annual community festival became a testament to their transformation. Where once residents had avoided each other, now they celebrated together. The event featured a storytelling booth where longtime residents shared their experiences, both the struggles under Margaret Holloway's regime and the hope of their new community. Marcus Rodriguez's forensic work had led to broader investigations of HOA management practices statewide. Several other communities discovered and addressed similar patterns of financial misconduct. Richard Thompson, seeking redemption, became a key witness in multiple cases, his testimony helping to dismantle other oppressive HOA systems. Sarah Thompson's community garden had become a neighborhood landmark. What was once a source of finds was now a place of connection, where residents of all ages gathered, planted, and shared stories. The rose bushes that had once triggered a $250 fine now bloomed freely, a living metaphor of their transformation. The most significant change was less visible but more profound. Residents had learned the power of collective action. They discovered that community wasn't about conformity, but about mutual respect, understanding, and shared purpose. As evening fell, James watched a group of neighbors gathering for a community meeting. Children played nearby, adults discussed community projects, and the sense of genuine connection was palpable. The garden gnome seemed to smile, a silent witness to their journey. Oakwood Estates was no longer just a neighborhood. It was a community in the truest sense, a place where individual rights were respected, where governance was transparent, and where people truly looked out for one another. The rebellion had ended, but the real revolution was just beginning.